Thank you very much for being on the programme. Now, there's been an awful lot of pitch rolling about what to expect from the autumn statement. Eye-watering, difficult decisions, according to the Chancellor. Yeah. Do we need to brace ourselves?
I think it's going to be quite tough because what we do know very clearly is we've got very high inflation, very tight labour market. We're going to have the prospect of pretty low growth for some time, in common with other economies around the world. The IMF is saying about a third of world economies will go into recession in the next year. And that's the backdrop with this huge fiscal hole that needs to be filled. So what we know from that is there are going to be some very tough decisions he's going to have to take on tax and on spending. What we don't know is what exactly they're going to look like, but there is a £50+ billion fiscal hole to fill, and that means some big decisions, I think.
Are we all going to be paying more tax?
Well, the Chancellor, I think, has said that. Whether it's absolutely everybody, down to every last member of the public that pays more tax or not, let's wait to see. But I think the point that he's making there is that the size of that fiscal hole is such that you're going to probably have to look at tax measures that are fairly broadly based if you're going to bring in the amounts of money that's required.
There's also, of course, talk about cuts to public services, and that's going to be alarming for a lot of people who will be looking at the state of their public services and thinking, where is the fat to be trimmed here? Schools, for example, where they've got, talking about cutting teaching assistants or cutting back on textbooks at a time when inflation is already at 11%.
Yes. That's part of what's going to be really difficult. Now, one of the first decisions he's going to have to take is what's the balance between tax rises and expenditure cuts. And we don't know that yet, but the more he leans into tax, of course, the less he'll have to lean into controlling expenditure. Well, you're absolutely right. With inflation as it is at the moment, given that most spending settlements were struck some time ago when expectations of inflation were much lower, there are going to be those additional pressures on the public finances. But let's see what he has to say about that. Bear in mind, of course, the pain here will probably be spread over several years, maybe 5 years, before we reach the critical point where his fiscal target kicks in, which I think will probably be 2027, 28. And it's in that year that he has to get all his sums to add up. He doesn't necessarily have to go for lots of short-term pain. He could spread it.
You see, this is where my slight scepticism kicks in, I'll be honest. Because obviously there will be some things that come in earlier. Are some of these cuts and spending squeezes a bit of a fantasy, designed to reassure the markets in the short term, but in the long term, particularly the ones that, as you say, are post the next election, they're not going to happen, are they?
Well, I think the critical phrase you've just used there, Sophie, is reassure the markets. That's the litmus test. So the markets will have a very good nose for this. They will look at the plans that are put forward and they will say, perhaps, I don't think it will happen, but maybe they might say, there's too much pain tomorrow. He's getting too easy a ride. He's pushing it all to the back beyond the next general election. It doesn't feel credible. I don't think he'll make that mistake. So I think there will be a fairly balanced budget in terms of what tax and spending are doing in the short and medium term, as well as further down the line. I
want to talk to you a bit about your department, Work and Pensions, a big spending department, of course. Now, Jeremy Hunt told me at the weekend, we've got a big increase in the number of people who aren't working, who aren't taking part in work, even though they perhaps could. Is he right?
Yes, he's absolutely right. Now, as it happens, compared to other major economies, they are in a very similar position. In fact, we're in no worse a position than most other economies. But nonetheless, there are 9 million people who are economically inactive. And they fall into 4 basic groups. One is students, then you've got those that have retired early, you've got those that are long-term sick, and you've got those that are caring, have caring responsibilities. Now, each one of those cohorts has different levers, if you like, that you can try and pull to encourage and support them into work. And what the Prime Minister has asked me to do is to look at that as a main project now for the DWP, is how do we really get across all those cohorts and do whatever we can to make sure we increase the uptake of those going into the workplace, particularly as that number's grown a lot during the pandemic. An extra 600,000 went into economic inactivity over the period of the pandemic.
So what levers are you going to pull then to try and encourage, if you like, these people back into work, to put the kindest gloss on it?
Yes, so it depends on the group that you're looking at. So, for example, if they are already engaged with the Department for Work and Pensions, they're on benefits, one would look at, for example, what kind of support are we providing people to get into work? How frequent is the contact we have for those, for example, that are on universal credit? How many hours do we expect people to work before we take a lighter touch approach to that? Do we extend the number of hours we expect people to be in work before we say, right, OK, we can leave you that support, withdraw that support a little bit? So I think there are issues around conditionality and benefits. If you've retired, however, early, say age 55, and you're feeling comfortable and you're not claiming any benefits at all, then you're kind of beyond our boundary. But nonetheless, there might be things that government more generally can do to encourage those people back into work. Flexible working offers, for example, making sure that those individuals are really clear as to what the costs of their retirement are going to be, because they're working on this assumption that taking it easy at 55 is going to still work out by the time you reach 65. So there are all sorts of different interventions, but what I'm going to do is look at each one of those cohorts in detail and do the really hard research, kicking of the tyres to make sure we come up with the best possible policy.
So you're quite open, saying that you are going to be trying to effectively push some people on benefits back into work. They should be working more in
when the Prime Minister appointed me in the Cabinet room, he discussed the various things he wanted me to do, and top of that list was economic, those that are disengaged from work.
Some will be saying that it sounds, could be seen as a bit heartless. If a lot of people that particularly on long-term sick who are on caring, as you say, or are on benefits, struggling, trying to make things work with inflation, they'll be looking at what you're saying and thinking, hang on a minute, he's talking about taking my money away from me and I cannot work.
This is I'm not talking about taking people's money away, and certainly not for very good reason. I mean, if people don't engage and expect to be supported and not do anything to look for work, then that's a particular scenario. But most people are far from that particular situation. But I think it is true that there are some within those various groups that we can help if we come up with the right policies to do that, and that's what I think we should do. And we know that of that 9 million, 1.7 million are saying that they want to work. So not everybody, there will some people with long-term illnesses where it just won't be appropriate and it won't work, and I accept that. But there are some millions for whom work is actually going to be quite appealing if we just make it happen.
Now, it looks from reporting as though the pensions triple lock may be protected. The government's talked a lot about people with the broadest shoulders bearing some of the burden. We're expecting to see a squeeze in pay, if you like, for public sector workers. Is it fair that for a retiree, many of whom are wealthy, although except, of course, there is pension poverty, that they might see their pensions go up by 10% along with inflation, when public sector workers could only dream of that kind of rise?
OK, well, the first thing is I can't confirm or deny whether the triple lock will stay. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait until tomorrow what the Chancellor has to say. But in terms of that 10%, of course, the uprating that occurred last time round, which was in April of last year, pegged on the previous September's inflation rate, was just 3.1%. So and inflation was running higher over most of the period after that. So there's an element of swings and roundabouts. But I think the critical thing about pensioners is that, unlike most of the rest of us, they're at a time of life where re-engaging with the workforce is much more problematic and difficult, and therefore it's much harder for them to adjust their own economic situation.
For public sector workers or for everyone else too as well.
That's
it's not
why,
easy.
Sophie,
if someone could click their fingers and get a pay rise, we'd all be at it.
Indeed. So that's why the government has come forward with all these interventions, like, for example, my department has been sending 8 million households £650. Now, they are households typically on UC. They're the lowest income households in the country, and then there's £150 for those with disabilities, £300 for pensioners again, and help with council tax for those on the lower council tax band. So there's lots of targeted support that's going into looking after just the people that you're referring to. OK.
I want to talk to you about Dominic Raab. He, of course, is facing an investigation into allegations of bullying behaviour. Is it correct that Rishi Sunak will be the ultimate arbiter of that investigation and all the findings will be passed to him to make a judgment?
Well, my understanding, and I think Dominic has done exactly the right thing, there have been a couple of instances of complaints that have come forward. He's gone to the Prime Minister. He's recommended to the Prime Minister that he looks into this. The PM has agreed. When Lord Geit is replaced, then there will be somebody to look into that. And I have no doubt that that individual, whoever it is, will do so without fear and favour. So
Lord Geit, of course, the ethics advisor sacked by Boris Johnson.
Well,
quite useful to have around, right?
The Prime Minister has made it very clear that integrity and transparency and good governance is absolutely core to this government's mission. So I have no doubt whoever replaces Lord Geit conducts this investigation will do so without fear, favour or indeed interference. So I'm absolutely confident that it will be an independent exercise.
Just finally, I want to talk a little bit about the wider culture in Westminster. So, going to park the allegations about Dominic Raab for now. Our reporters Liz Bates and Aggie Chambre have been investigating bullying in Westminster for a podcast, Open Secret. All parties, not just the Conservatives. And I just want to read to you some of the anonymous quotes given to them. She was always asking me, the MP from a staffer, she was always asking me to do things that were inappropriate. She got me to scrub stains out of the carpet. Another one. I remember feeling like a dog in an RSPCA advert where they hide behind the sofa when the owners are coming back. And finally, I knew she had a terrible reputation. Some other MPs approached me after I left and said, oh, my God, how did you last that long?
Right. Well, clearly, we don't know the specifics of all those cases that you've raised, but they sound pretty horrific. And they're unacceptable. And that's why I think the House of Commons, as a general sort of umbrella to all the MPs as employers, has come a long way, actually, with its grievance procedures, and people are encouraged to come forward now. So I think that's the way forward. But it's very sad when you hear those things. I totally agree. I can only speak from my own experience, mixing and mingling with members of Parliament. And, OK, I don't spend a lot of time down in the bars, as it happens, and perhaps that's where all the bad behaviour goes on. But I've found, generally speaking, that colleagues are serious people who want to do the best for their constituency, and I say that right across the House, all parties, and generally treat their staff with great respect. But where there are exceptions, it needs to be dealt with, and I think the processes are now there for that to happen.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.